In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where the streets were lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and the houses all looked like they belonged in a magazine, life moved at a slow, predictable pace. The people who lived there took pride in their community. It was the kind of place where everyone waved hello to each other, but only if they already knew your name. Strangers stuck out like sore thumbs, especially if they didn't quite fit the mold. This is where our story begins, with a young woman named Jasmine. She was radiant, glowing even because she was pregnant. Her energy lit up any room she walked into, and her smile could warm even the coldest hearts. But despite her charm, Jasmine felt like an outsider from the moment she moved into the neighborhood. You see, this wasn't just any suburb, it was one of those places where everyone seemed to look alike, think alike, and live by unspoken rules that nobody ever questioned. Jasmine had recently relocated here with her husband, a man whose title carried weight. He was the newly elected mayor of their city. They chose this neighborhood for its reputation as a safe, family-friendly area, a perfect place to raise their soon-to-arrive baby. But almost immediately, Jasmine noticed something unsettling. Some neighbors avoided making eye contact when she passed them on the street. Others whispered behind closed doors or gave her quick, judgmental glances. At first, she tried to brush it off, telling herself it was probably nothing. Maybe they were just shy or unsure how to welcome new faces, but then there was Susan. Susan lived 2 doors down, and she made no secret of her disapproval. She was middle-aged, always dressed neatly, and had strong opinions about what she called community standards. To Susan, the arrival of someone like Jasmine felt like a disruption, an unwelcome change in the carefully curated bubble she'd built around herself. Every time Susan saw Jasmine sitting on her porch or tending to her garden, irritation bubbled inside her. In Susan's mind, Jasmine didn't belong here. And so, without realizing the consequences, Susan decided to take matters into her own hands. One sunny afternoon, Jasmine was enjoying some fresh air on her front porch. She had a book in hand, soaking in the peacefulness of the day. The baby kicked gently under her ribs, reminding her of the little miracle growing inside her. It was moments like these that made all the stress of moving worth it. Life felt good. Simple, peaceful, but not far away. Susan watched through her window. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she stared at Jasmine, convinced that something wasn't right. Why was she sitting outside? Wasn't she supposed to be doing whatever it was people did to keep neighborhoods looking pristine? Susan shook, her head muttering to herself. Finally, after what felt like hours but was really only minutes, she picked up her phone and dialed 3 numbers, 911. "Hi," Susan said when the operator answered. "I need to report a suspicious person. There's a black woman sitting on a porch across the street. I don't think she belongs here." The operator asked for more details, but Susan couldn't provide much beyond vague descriptions. Still, within minutes, police cars rolled down the quiet street, their lights flashing silently. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, curious about the commotion. Jasmine, still engrossed in her book, barely noticed until 2 officers approached her driveway. "Ma'am?" One of them called out cautiously. Jasmine looked up, startled. "Yes? Can I help you?" The officers introduced themselves and began asking questions. Who was she? Did she live here? What was she doing outside? Jasmine, though confused, remained calm. She explained that she was a resident and showed them proof of her address. As the conversation went on, it became clear that this was nothing more than a misunderstanding, or so it seemed. What Susan hadn't realized, and what the officers certainly didn't know yet, was that Jasmine's husband wasn't just any man, he was the mayor, a public figure known throughout the city for his commitment to fairness and equality. When he returned home later that evening to find his wife visibly shaken, anger surged through him. But alongside the anger came resolve. This wasn't just about them anymore. It was about sending a message to the entire community, a message that prejudice, no matter how subtle, wouldn't be tolerated. That night, as they sat together in their living room, Jasmine shared every detail of the incident with her husband. His jaw tightened as he listened, his mind racing with possibilities. By morning, he'd come up with a plan. he would call a town hall meeting, inviting everyone in the neighborhood, including Susan, to talk openly about what had happened. It was risky, sure, but sometimes the hardest conversations lead to the most meaningful changes. Little did anyone know, this decision would set off a chain reaction of events that would challenge every resident's assumptions, not just about Jasmine and her family, but about themselves. The sleepy suburb was about to wake up, whether it was ready or not. The next day, news of the 911 call spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. People whispered about it over coffee, during morning walks, and even at the grocery store. Some neighbors sympathized with Jasmine, shaking their heads in disbelief that something like this could happen in their quiet little community. Others, however, sided with Susan, saying she was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. The divide grew wider with every conversation. Jasmine's husband, who had been planning the town hall meeting, felt a mix of emotions: anger toward Susan for making the call, frustration with the police for showing up without proper cause, and sadness for his wife, who now felt unwelcome in her own home. He knew this wasn't just about one bad decision or one person's prejudice. It was bigger than that. It was about how people treated each other when they let fear and assumptions cloud their judgment. That evening, as he sat down with Jasmine to discuss what to do next, she surprised him. Despite everything, she didn't want to retaliate or make Susan feel cornered. "We can't fight hate with more hate," she said softly. "If we really want things to change, we need to show them why this matters not just for us, but for everyone." Her words struck a chord with him. Instead of lashing out publicly or demanding an apology from Susan, they decided to focus on education. They would use the town hall meeting as a platform to talk about race, privilege, and the importance of treating others with respect, no matter how different they seemed. But deep down, they both knew it wouldn't be easy. Convincing people to confront their biases is never simple, especially when those biases are hidden behind smiles and polite small talk. When the invitations for the town hall went out, reactions were mixed. Some residents eagerly, RSVP'd, curious to hear what the mayor had to say. Others rolled their eyes, calling it a waste of time. And then there was Susan. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach every time she thought about attending. Part of her wanted to stay home and avoid the whole thing, but another part, the part that still believed she'd done nothing wrong, felt compelled to go. After all, she reasoned, she hadn't meant any harm. She was just being cautious. Or so she told herself. On the night of the meeting, the community center buzzed with tension. Chairs were set up in neat rows, and a podium stood at the front of the room. People filed in slowly, some exchanging awkward glances, others avoiding eye contact altogether. Jasmine sat near the front, holding her husband's hand tightly. She tried to smile at familiar faces, but it was hard. Every pair of eyes felt like judgment waiting to happen. Finally, the mayor stepped up to the microphone. The room fell silent as he began to speak. His voice was calm but firm, filled with emotion, yet measured enough to command attention. He started by thanking everyone for coming, acknowledging that these kinds of conversations weren't easy. Then he dove into the heart of the matter. "I'm here today because my wife, a woman who is carrying our child, was reported to the police while sitting peacefully on her own porch," he said, pausing to let the weight of his words sink. She was accused of being suspicious simply because of the color of her skin. "Well, let me ask you this. Does suspicion have a face? Does it wear a certain color?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in agreement. A few looked away, unable to meet his gaze. He continued, sharing stories of similar incidents that had happened not just in their city, but across the country. Each example painted a clearer picture of a problem that ran deeper than anyone cared to admit. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for, or dreading, depending on their perspective. The mayor invited Susan to join him at the front. Her cheeks flushed red as she hesitated, unsure whether to stand or stay seated. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she rose and walked to the podium. Her steps slow and deliberate. Taking the microphone, Susan cleared her throat nervously. I called 911 because I thought something wasn't right," she stammered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." I saw someone sitting outside and I guess I assumed. Her voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. Assumed what? That assumption hung heavy in the air, unspoken but understood. Susan glanced at Jasmine, who met her gaze steadily. There was no anger in Jasmine's expression, only a quiet strength that made Susan feel even smaller. For the first time, she realized the impact of her actions not just on Jasmine, but on everyone who heard about the incident. As Susan struggled to find the right words, the room grew quieter. Some people looked at her with pity, others with impatience. A young man in the back raised his hand and spoke up. "Ma'am, do you realize how dangerous your call could have been?" He asked, "What if the officers hadn't listened to her explanation? What if something worse had happened?" Susan flinched at the question, her hands gripping the sides of the podium. I didn't think about that," she admitted. I acted without thinking." The mayor nodded, stepping back to the microphone. "That's exactly the point," he said gently. "When we act based on assumptions instead of facts, we put people at risk. We create fear where there shouldn't be any, and we hurt those who deserve better." By the end of the meeting, emotions were running high. Some attendees applauded the mayor's courage in addressing the issue head-on. Others argued that Susan shouldn't be singled out, insisting that everyone makes mistakes. But amidst the heated discussions, one thing became clear. The neighborhood couldn't ignore the elephant in the room anymore. Change was necessary, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable truths. As people trickled out of the community center, Susan lingered near the exit, unsure of what to do next. She spotted Jasmine standing nearby, talking quietly with a group of supporters. Summoning every ounce of courage she had, Susan approached her. "Can we talk?" Susan asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine turned to face her, surprise flickering across her features. "Of course," she replied, gesturing toward an empty corner of the room. They sat down together, the silence between them thick, with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Susan broke it. "I owe you an apology," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never meant to hurt you. I let my fears get the best of me. I'm so sorry." Jasmine studied her for a moment before responding. "Thank you for apologizing," she said evenly. "But apologies aren't enough. If you really want to make things right, you'll have to do more than say sorry. You'll have to help us. Build a better community, one where no one feels unsafe because of who they are." Susan nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I'll do whatever it takes," she promised. "Just tell me where to start." And with that, an unlikely partnership began to form. Over the following weeks, Susan threw herself into efforts to promote understanding and inclusivity in the neighborhood. She joined a newly formed diversity committee, attended workshops, and even hosted gatherings at her house to bring people together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of doubt, backlash, and frustration, but she stuck with it, determined to prove that she could be part of the solution rather than the problem. Meanwhile, Jasmine and her husband continued to lead by example, using their experiences to inspire others to take action against prejudice. Slowly but surely, the neighborhood began to change, not overnight, but in small, meaningful ways that added up over time. Conversations that once seemed impossible became opportunities for growth. Friendships formed where none existed before. And though challenges remained, the community took its first steps toward becoming something greater than it had ever been. In the weeks following the town hall meeting, the neighborhood found itself in a strange state of limbo. On one hand, there was a newfound sense of awareness. People were talking about issues they'd previously ignored or dismissed. Conversations about race, privilege, and inclusion became more common, even if they weren't always comfortable. On the other hand, old habits die hard, and some residents still clung to their biases, refusing to acknowledge that anything needed to change. Susan, for her part, was determined to make amends. She knew she couldn't undo what had happened, but she could try to be better moving forward. Every morning, as she brewed her coffee and looked out at the street, she reminded herself of the promise she'd made to Jasmine to help build a community where everyone felt safe and valued. It wasn't just lip service, it was a commitment she intended to keep. No matter how difficult it got. Her first step was joining the diversity committee. The group met once a week at the community center, bringing together neighbors from all walks of life. Some members were passionate advocates who had long pushed for change. Others, like Susan, were newcomers eager to learn and contribute. At first, Susan felt out of place. She worried that people would judge her or hold her past actions against her. But to her relief, most of the group welcomed her with open arms or at least gave her the benefit of the doubt. One of the committee's early projects was organizing workshops on unconscious bias. These sessions aimed to help residents recognize the subtle ways prejudice can creep into everyday interactions. Experts were brought in to lead discussions, share stories, and guide participants through exercises designed to challenge their assumptions. Susan attended every session, taking notes and asking questions. Sometimes the lessons hit close to home, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about her own behavior. But instead of shutting down, she leaned in, determined to grow. The workshop sparked lively debates among attendees. During one particularly heated discussion, an older man stood up and voiced his frustration. "I don't see color," he declared, crossing his arms defiantly. "Why are we making such a big deal out of this?" His comment drew murmurs of disagreement from the crowd. A younger woman sitting nearby raised her hand and spoke up. "Saying you don't see color isn't helpful," she explained gently, but firmly. "It dismisses the experiences of people who face discrimination because of their race. Seeing color means recognizing differences and celebrating them." The room fell silent as her words sank in. Even the man who had spoken earlier seemed to soften, nodding thoughtfully. Moments like these reminded everyone why the work mattered. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but each small victory brought them closer to understanding one another, outside of the workshops. Susan began hosting informal gatherings at her house. She invited neighbors over for coffee mornings and potluck dinners, encouraging them to mingle and get to know each other beyond surface-level pleasantries. At first, turnout was modest. Only a handful of people showed up, mostly those already involved in the diversity committee. But as word spread, more residents started attending. Curious to see what these events were all about, one Saturday afternoon, Susan decided to host a cultural exchange day. Each guest was asked to bring a dish that represented their heritage or background. The result was a vibrant spread of flavors and traditions: spicy curries, savory empanadas, sweet baklava, and more. As neighbors sampled the food, they shared stories about their families, their cultures, and their journeys to the neighborhood. Laughter filled the air, along with the occasional burst of applause when someone revealed a hidden talent like playing the guitar or reciting poetry. Jasmine attended the event with her husband, bringing along a tray of homemade macaroni and cheese, a family favorite. When Susan saw her walk in, she immediately approached her, smiling warmly. "Thank you for coming," she said sincerely. "This wouldn't feel complete without you." Jasmine returned the smile, touched by Susan's effort. "You're doing great work," she replied. "Keep going." Encouraged by Jasmine's support, Susan threw herself into organizing similar events. There were movie nights featuring films about social justice, book clubs focused on diverse authors, and even art exhibits showcasing local talent. Each activity brought the community closer together, breaking down barriers and fostering connections that might not have formed otherwise, but not everyone was on board. A small faction of residents continued to resist the changes, grumbling about political correctness and claiming the neighborhood was losing its character. They stopped attending meetings and avoided participating in events, preferring to stick to their usual routines. Some even spread rumors, accusing the diversity committee of pushing an agenda that didn't reflect the true values of the community. These criticisms stung, especially for Susan, who had worked so hard to bridge divides. But instead of letting negativity discourage her, she doubled down on her efforts. She reached out to skeptics, inviting them to join conversations and offering to listen to their concerns. While not everyone warmed up to her, a few did, admitting that they'd been hesitant because they didn't fully understand what the committee was trying to achieve. Hearing their perspectives helped Susan refine her approach, ensuring that initiatives were inclusive and accessible to everyone. As months passed, the neighborhood began to transform not in how it looked, but in how it felt. People greeted each other more warmly, striking up conversations instead of rushing past. Kids played together in the streets, their laughter echoing through the trees. Neighbors checked in on one another, lending a hand when someone needed help. It was as if a weight had been lifted, allowing everyone to breathe a little easier. Even the mayor and his wife noticed the shift. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Jasmine rested her head on her husband's shoulder. "Do you think we're making a difference?" she asked softly. He kissed the top of her head and smiled. "We are," he said. "It's not perfect, and it never will be, but look around. Things are different now. Better." Jasmine nodded, feeling a surge of hope. Yes, challenges remained. Prejudice hadn't disappeared entirely, and there would always be moments of tension. But progress was happening, one conversation, one gesture, one connection at a time, and then came the moment that truly cemented the neighborhood's transformation: the birth of Jasmine's baby. The arrival of the little one brought joy too. Everyone who had come to admire Jasmine's resilience and grace. At the naming ceremony, held in the community center, the mayor delivered a heartfelt speech thanking those who had supported them during challenging times. He spoke about the power of unity and the importance of continuing to fight for equality, not just within their neighborhood, but everywhere. Susan attended the ceremony, holding back tears as she watched the couple celebrate their growing family. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud, not just of herself, but of the community she was helping to shape. It wasn't perfect, and it probably never would be. But it was moving in the right direction, and that was enough. The birth of Jasmine's baby marked a turning point for the neighborhood, not just because it was a joyous occasion, but because it symbolized hope and renewal. The child, a healthy and cheerful boy, became a source of inspiration for everyone who had witnessed the struggles and triumphs of the past months. His presence reminded them that life is about growth, connection, and building bridges instead of walls. In the weeks after the naming ceremony, the community rallied around Jasmine and her husband in ways they hadn't anticipated. Neighbors dropped by with meals, hand-knitted blankets, and tiny outfits for the baby. Some offered to babysit or run errands so the couple could get some rest. These small acts of kindness weren't just practical, they were heartfelt gestures that showed how much people cared. It was as if the entire neighborhood had adopted the new family, treating them like their own. But this newfound warmth wasn't limited to Jasmine and her husband. Slowly but surely it began to spread throughout the community. People started reaching out to one another more often, checking in on neighbors they hadn't spoken to in years. A retired teacher down the street organized weekly storytime sessions for kids, bringing families together in her backyard. Another neighbor, an avid gardener, invited others to join her in planting flowers along the sidewalks, creating colorful patches of beauty that brightened up the area. Even the local park saw more activity, with parents gathering for impromptu playdates and picnics. Susan played a key role in keeping the momentum going. She threw herself into organizing events and initiatives, determined to keep the spirit of unity alive. One of her most successful projects was a Neighbor Appreciation Day, where residents came together to celebrate the bonds they'd formed. There were games, music, and plenty of food, including dishes from different cultures that reflected the diversity of the community. Kids ran around laughing, while adults mingled and shared stories. For many, it felt like the first time they truly belonged to something bigger than themselves. During one such event, Susan found herself sitting next to Jasmine under a shady tree, watching the festivities unfold. The baby cooed happily in his stroller, drawing smiles from passers-by. Susan glanced at Jasmine, feeling a mix of admiration and gratitude. "You know," she said softly, "I never thought I'd end up being friends with someone like you." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, amused. "Someone like me?" Susan chuckled nervously. "You know what I mean. Before all this happened, I probably wouldn't have even talked to you. I'm ashamed to admit it now, but I judged you based on, well, everything you represent. And I missed out on knowing an amazing person because of it." Jasmine smiled, her expression warm and forgiving. "We all make mistakes," she said. "What matters is learning from them, and you've done that. Look at everything you've done for this neighborhood. You've made a real difference." Susan blushed, brushing off the compliment. But deep down she felt a sense of pride. Her journey hadn't been easy. There were days when doubt crept in, when old habits threatened to resurface, but she'd stayed committed to change. And now, seeing the results of her efforts, she knew it had been worth it. As the months went by, the neighborhood continued to evolve. Conversations about race and inclusion became less formal and more natural, woven into the fabric of daily life. The Diversity Committee remained active, tackling new challenges and finding creative solutions. They launched a mentorship program pairing younger residents with older ones, fostering intergenerational connections. They also collaborated with local schools to teach students about empathy and cultural awareness, ensuring that the next generation grew up with open minds and open hearts. Even the skeptics began to soften. While some still grumbled about the changes, many couldn't deny the positive impact they were seeing. Crime rates dropped, property values rose, and the overall atmosphere improved. What once felt cold and divided now radiated warmth and camaraderie. People took pride in their community again, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. One evening, during a casual gathering at Susan's house, a young mother stood up and shared a story that left everyone speechless. She talked about how, before moving to the neighborhood, she'd been hesitant to raise her biracial children there, fearing they wouldn't fit in. But over time, she realized she'd been wrong. Her kids loved playing with their neighbors, and she no longer worried about them being treated differently because of the color of their skin. "This place has taught me that change is possible," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "And it gives me hope for my kids, for all of us." Her words resonated deeply with everyone in the room. Tears welled up in some eyes, while others nodded in agreement. It was a powerful reminder that progress isn't measured by grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It's seen in the everyday moments that bring people closer together. Despite the strides they'd made, the mayor and his wife knew the work wasn't finished. Racism and prejudice are deeply rooted issues that can't be solved overnight or even in a lifetime. But they believed in the power of persistence, of continuing to push forward even when the road got tough. Together, they encouraged the community to stay vigilant, reminding everyone that equality requires constant effort. Their message struck a chord with Susan, who had come to view her role as an ally as a lifelong commitment. She understood that being part of the solution meant more than attending meetings or hosting events. It meant listening, learning, and standing up when others couldn't. So she kept showing up, not just for Jasmine and her family, but for everyone who needed support. By the time the baby took his first steps, the neighborhood had transformed in ways no one could have imagined. The streets buzzed with energy, filled with laughter and chatter. Strangers became friends, and friends became family. The community center, once a quiet space used only for official purposes, now served as a hub of activity, hosting everything from art classes to fitness workshops. Looking back, Susan marveled at how far they'd come. From the tense town hall meeting to the vibrant, inclusive neighborhood they'd built, every step of the journey had been meaningful. Mistakes had been made, lessons had been learned, and relationships had been forged through honesty and hard work. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. And as she watched the baby toddle across the grass during a summer picnic, surrounded by cheering neighbors, Susan felt a surge of optimism. This little boy, born into a world full of challenges, would grow up in a community that valued him not despite his differences but because of them. That thought filled her with pride and purpose, fueling her determination to keep fighting for a better future. Change, she realized, starts with a single step. And sometimes that step is as simple as opening your heart and mind to someone new. As the years rolled by, the neighborhood continued to grow and evolve in ways that surprised even its most optimistic residents. What had once been a place of subtle tensions and unspoken divides became a model of inclusivity and unity. The transformation wasn't just visible, it was felt in the air, in the way people greeted each other with genuine warmth, in the way kids played together without noticing differences, and in the way neighbors looked out for one another like an extended family. The baby, now a lively toddler with curly hair and a mischievous grin, had become the unofficial mascot of the community. His presence seemed to bring everyone together, whether it was during impromptu playdates at the park or annual block parties where he toddled around collecting high fives from adoring neighbors. People often joked that he'd inherited his parents' knack for bringing people closer, even if he didn't realize it yet. Susan, who had started this journey as someone skeptical of change, now found herself at the heart of it all. She wasn't just participating, she was leading. Her home had become a gathering spot for neighbors, a place where people could drop by any time for coffee, advice, or simply a listening ear. She hosted monthly story circles, inviting residents to share personal experiences about overcoming challenges or moments when they felt truly accepted. These sessions weren't always easy. Some stories were raw and emotional, leaving listeners teary-eyed. But they created a space where vulnerability was celebrated, not shamed. One evening, during one of these story circles, a middle-aged man stood up and cleared his throat nervously. He'd lived in the neighborhood for decades but rarely spoke up in group settings. Tonight, however, something compelled him to share. "I used to think this place was perfect," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "But what I realize is that perfection isn't real. What makes us strong isn't pretending everything's fine. It's facing our problems head-on and working through them together." He paused, glancing around the room before continuing. "I wasn't supportive of the changes at first. I thought they were unnecessary. But seeing how far we've come, how much closer we are now, I can't imagine going back to the way things were. We're better because of it." His admission drew murmurs of agreement from the crowd. Even those who hadn't warmed up to the diversity committee initially nodded along, recognizing the truth in his words. It was a reminder that growth doesn't happen overnight, and sometimes it takes hearing someone else's perspective to see your own clearly. Meanwhile, Jasmine and her husband remained pillars of strength and inspiration for the community. Though their lives were busy, they juggled parenting, careers, and advocacy work. They never lost sight of the bigger picture. They understood that progress was fragile and required constant nurturing. So they stayed involved, attending events, mentoring young leaders, and encouraging others to take ownership of the changes happening around them. Their efforts paid off in unexpected ways. The neighborhood's reputation spread beyond its borders, earning recognition as a model for fostering inclusivity and understanding. Local newspapers wrote articles about their journey, highlighting the initiatives that had brought people together. Schools and organizations from neighboring areas reached out, asking for advice on how to replicate their success. Soon, representatives from other communities began visiting to learn firsthand what made this suburb so special. One such visit stood out in particular. A group of students from a nearby high school came to tour the neighborhood as part of a social studies project. They interviewed residents, attended workshops, and participated in activities designed to promote empathy and connection. At the end of their visit, one student, a shy girl with glasses, spoke up during a Q&A session. "What if we don't have leaders like you guys?" she asked hesitantly. "How do we start?" Jasmine smiled warmly, leaning forward to address the question. "Change doesn't need big leaders," she said firmly. "It starts with ordinary people deciding to care. You don't have to fix everything at once. Just pick one thing, one person, one conversation, and go from there. That's how we did it here." Her answer resonated deeply with the students, sparking animated discussions as they boarded the bus to leave. For many of them, it was the first time they'd considered themselves capable of making a difference. And while most would return to their own neighborhoods and forget about the trip, a few carried the message home, planting seeds of change in their own communities. Back in the suburb, life continued to hum along smoothly. The Diversity Committee expanded its reach, partnering with local businesses and nonprofits to tackle broader issues like affordable housing and education equity. Residents volunteered their time and skills, proving that grassroots movements could achieve remarkable results when everyone worked together. Even the skeptics who had resisted change early on found themselves drawn into the fold. Some joined volunteer projects, discovering a sense of purpose they hadn't known they were missing. Others simply grew quieter in their objections, realizing that arguing against progress only highlighted their isolation. Over time, resistance faded, replaced by acceptance and occasionally enthusiasm. Of course, challenges still arose. New families moved in, bringing fresh perspectives and occasional misunderstandings. Missteps happened, reminders that no community is immune to bias or conflict. But instead of sweeping these incidents under the rug, residents addressed them openly, using them as opportunities to learn and grow. The mayor often reminded everyone that setbacks were part of the process, not failures to be ashamed of. You don't build trust overnight, he told a packed room during one meeting. And you don't erase generations of prejudice in a few months. But every step matters, every effort counts. Keep showing up, keep talking, and keep believing in each other. His words echoed throughout the community, reinforcing the values that had guided them thus far: patience, persistence, and faith in humanity's ability to adapt and improve. By the time the baby turned 5, the neighborhood bore little resemblance to the divided, cautious place it had once been. Houses sported colorful murals painted by local artists, celebrating diversity and resilience. Community gardens flourished, tended by volunteers of all ages. Neighbors gathered regularly for potlucks, game nights, and holiday celebrations, creating traditions that reflected their shared commitment to INCLUSIVITY. At the boy's birthday party, held in the same community center where the town hall meeting had taken place years earlier, Susan stood back and watched the scene unfold. Kids ran around laughing, their faces smeared with cake frosting. Adults chatted animatedly, swapping stories and sharing hugs. Music played softly in the background, blending with the sounds of joy and laughter. Jasmine approached her, holding a plate of cupcakes. "Here," she said, handing one over. "You deserve it," Susan laughed, taking the cupcake gratefully. "For what? Eating too much already?" "No," Jasmine replied, her tone teasing but sincere. "For sticking with us. For fighting for this place. For being brave enough to change." Susan felt a lump rise in her throat. She glanced around the room, taking in the faces of her neighbors, the people who had become her chosen family. "We changed together," she said finally. "None of this would have happened without everyone pitching in," Jasmine nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "Exactly, and that's why it works. Because it's ours." As the party wound down, Susan lingered outside, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She thought about how far they'd come from suspicion and division to trust and unity. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every moment of effort. This neighborhood, flawed and imperfect as it was, had taught her the power of second chances, not just for herself, but for everyone willing to embrace change. She knew the journey wasn't over. There would always be more work to do, more bridges to build. But standing there, surrounded by the sounds of a thriving community, Susan felt hopeful. They'd proven that even the deepest divides could be bridged one conversation, one gesture, one connection at a time. And that gave her faith that anything was possible. Years passed, and the neighborhood continued to thrive in ways that felt almost magical. It wasn't perfect, no place ever is, but it had become something special, a community where people truly cared for one another. The transformation was so profound that newcomers often remarked on how welcoming everyone seemed. They didn't know the full story, of course, the tense town hall meeting, the awkward beginnings of the diversity committee, or the countless hours spent mending broken relationships. To them, it simply felt like home. The baby who had once toddled around at block parties was now a bright-eyed schoolboy, eager to learn and explore. His laughter echoed through the streets as he rode his bike with friends, completely unaware of the role he'd played in bringing people together. For his parents, watching him grow up in such a supportive environment filled their hearts with gratitude. They knew they'd made the right decision moving here, even if the journey had been rocky at times. Susan, too, had changed in ways she never imagined. Once hesitant and unsure, she had grown into a confident advocate for equality and understanding. Her days of making assumptions based on appearances were long behind her. Instead, she approached life with curiosity and humility, always ready to listen and learn. She often joked that joining the diversity committee had been the best decision she ever made, not just because it helped heal the neighborhood, but because it changed her as a person. Her efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. One day, while walking to the community center, she was stopped by a young woman who looked vaguely familiar. "Excuse me," the woman said shyly. "Aren't you Susan?" Susan nodded, smiling politely. "Yes, I am. Do I know you?" "I don't think so," the woman replied, "but I've heard about you. You're kind of a legend around here." Susan laughed, brushing off the compliment. "A legend? That's a bit much, don't you think?" "No, really," the woman insisted. "You stood up when no one else would. You showed us what it means to take responsibility and make things right. It's inspiring." For a moment, Susan was speechless. She glanced down at her hands, remembering all the times she doubted herself, all the moments when fear or guilt had threatened to hold her back. Hearing those words from someone she barely knew reminded her of why she'd kept going even when it felt hard, even when it felt impossible. As the years went on, the neighborhood became a beacon of hope for others facing similar challenges. People from nearby towns visited to see how residents had turned division into unity. Some came seeking advice. Others simply wanted to soak in the atmosphere of kindness and acceptance. Local leaders invited the mayor and other residents to speak at conferences and workshops, sharing their story as an example of what communities could achieve when they worked together. One particularly memorable event took place during a regional summit on social justice. A panel discussion featured several key figures from the neighborhood, including Jasmine and Susan, as they sat side by side on stage, answering questions from the audience. It struck many attendees how far these two women had come from adversaries to allies and finally to friends. When asked about the turning point in their journey, Susan spoke candidly. "I think the biggest lesson I learned is that change starts with admitting you're wrong," she said. "It's not easy to admit that you messed up, especially when your actions hurt someone else, but until you do, nothing can improve. And once you take that step, amazing things can happen." Jasmine nodded in agreement. "And the second part is trusting that people want to do better," she added. "Not everyone will get it right away, but most people genuinely care. If you give them a chance, they'll surprise you." Their words resonated deeply with the audience, sparking conversations that lasted long after the event ended. Many left feeling inspired, armed with practical ideas they could bring back to their own neighborhoods. Word spread quickly, and soon, invitations poured in from across the country, asking the community to share its story again and again. Back home, life carried on as usual. The Diversity Committee remained active, tackling new issues and finding innovative solutions. Residents continued to organize events, from cultural festivals to environmental cleanups, ensuring that everyone had a chance to contribute. Even the youngest members of the community got involved, planting trees, painting murals, and participating in food drives. One summer evening, as golden sunlight bathed the streets, the neighborhood gathered for its annual Unity Day celebration. This event had become a cherished tradition, marking how far they'd come since that fateful 911 call years ago. Food stalls lined the sidewalks, offering dishes from around the world. Live music filled the air, blending harmoniously with the chatter of happy voices. Children darted between tables, clutching balloons and giggling uncontrollably. At the center of it all stood a large banner, hand-painted by local artists. It read, "Together we grow." Beneath it, a photo collage showcased memories from the past decade: smiling faces at workshops, volunteers planting gardens, families celebrating holidays side by side. Each image told a piece of the story, reminding everyone of the hard work and dedication that had brought them here. As dusk fell, The mayor stepped onto a small stage set up in the park. He thanked everyone for coming, his voice filled with emotion. "This neighborhood has taught me something important," he said, pausing to let his words sink in. "Real change doesn't happen because of laws or policies. It happens because of people, because of you. Because you chose to care, to listen, to try. And because of that, we've built something beautiful." He gestured toward the crowd, his eyes scanning the sea of familiar faces. "We're not done yet. There's still more work to do, more bridges to build. But if we keep showing up for each other, I know we'll get there. Together." The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the shared pride and determination that bonded everyone present. As fireworks lit up the night sky, casting colorful reflections on smiling faces, it was clear that this community had found its rhythm, a delicate balance of honesty, empathy, and resilience. In quiet moments afterward, Susan often reflected on how different her life might have been if she hadn't made that phone call all those years ago. Would she have stayed stuck in her old ways, blind to the beauty of diversity? Or would she have found another path to growth and understanding? She didn't know, and maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd chosen to move forward, to embrace the discomfort of change and emerge stronger on the other side. Jasmine, too, thought about how much she'd gained, not just as an individual, but as part of a larger whole. She realized that forgiveness wasn't just about letting go of anger, it was about opening doors to new possibilities. By choosing to forgive Susan, she had allowed room for friendship, collaboration, and healing. And in doing so, she had helped create a ripple effect that touched countless lives. As the years rolled on, the neighborhood continued to evolve, adapting to new challenges and opportunities. New families moved in, bringing fresh perspectives and energy. Older residents passed down stories and wisdom, ensuring that the lessons of the past weren't forgotten. Through it all, the spirit of unity endured, rooted in the belief that every person deserved to belong. Looking back, it was easy to see how one incident, a single phone call, had sparked a chain reaction that transformed an entire community. It served as a reminder that even the smallest actions can have far-reaching consequences, for better or worse. But it also proved that mistakes don't define us, it's how we respond to them that truly matters. And so, life in the suburb carried on, shaped by the choices of ordinary people determined to create something extraordinary. Their journey wasn't over, but they faced the future with courage and hope, knowing they had already achieved the impossible, turning strangers into family, suspicion into trust, and division into unity, because in the end, change isn't about perfection, it's about progress. And sometimes that's enough.